Ah, my friends, this is the perfect world. We have the ideal Germany, the weirdest Italy, and then of course an independent India long before that happened historically. This right here is a disaster save in more than one ways, and we're going to explore what happened here and what we can do about it today. But be warned, this is not one of the classic disaster saves, because once we explore what went wrong, it's fairly easy to understand. Today I want to explore the topic of human batteries, because I found out about this a couple months back. I actually did like a proper Google sheet. I explored exactly what was happening there to understand the effect and how to utilize it, and well, this may be patched at some point or another, because it has been reported by me a while ago. Let's explore what it is and why you shouldn't make the mistakes that the India player has made here, because, well, it's not at all necessary. Now, for starters, let's take a look at what our actual situation is so that we understand why the sort of approach that the player was taking was wrong rather than the outcome. First of all, we're looking at the military campaign here in China. It's a very standard one. The player overlooked that they don't really have to fight in Tibet. They could have invaded here right away. This looks like a pretty fresh invasion because there's no Chinese troops actually assigned to it, which would have won us the war, but at this point, we're at -95. I mean, this war is over. We're going to be owing them Indian war reparations. It is what it is. The other thing, and if you've played this game a lot, then you will have immediately seen this, which again, we don't really need to address this for too long. The other thing is that the construction number just isn't high enough. When you are playing vanilla, you have an incredible and absolutely insane population growth. What this means, if you're playing a nation like India, is that if you don't build fast enough, yeah, this is what will happen. This is what happened here, and while we don't pay them anything, meaning they're just starving, it creates turmoil, and more importantly, it makes it so that you won't ever really build a big consumer base. Because do recall that the wages are largely raised in these buildings that these people are working on if there are no other people to work. Which means if you're competing for actual workforce, the wages will go up. With 10 million being unemployed, yeah, there isn't really a workforce shortage, there's no competition, and we can basically pay anything in these buildings. So what that means is we need to build faster than our pop growth grows, and again, admittedly in vanilla, that can be quite difficult, but it's possible. Now, when I look at these numbers, I will tell you right away, if you are an iron production as India at this point in the game, you probably want about 1,000 to 1,500 construction points. It's something that you will just gauge, you will feel it as you go. Don't be afraid of going negative, that is an absolute classic. I believe actually there is a bit of a mistake the player made right here. Yep, they are still using these road maintenance decrease and all that stuff. Don't even bother with that. Instead, put all that stuff in maximum taxes and then bump up the consumption taxes for anybody that is rich, making it so that, yeah, they might become angry, but who cares? We can use that money to build things and make other people even richer. So this means our first priority is, of course, to build this up as much as we can. And quite frankly, this will already fix it. We're going to go slightly negative, and at about 50% to the debt limit, we're looking at a situation where our economy will have exploded, in particular if at that point we already unlock steel frame construction. So this main problem of this playthrough is essentially solved. However, the player that sent me this save game actually pointed out another weakness that kept them from succeeding, and that is that on the military level, they can't really compete with the Western powers because, well, they just don't have the technology. They were trying to bring up their literacy and it didn't really go anywhere, and left them in a spot where, yep, it takes them literal ages to research any of this. Now, in their queue, they do actually have more universities, so if you're looking at this and you're thinking, hey, you're not even maxing out innovation, you are right, but they are working on fixing this. But let me just tell you something right here. If you are playing a nation that starts as really backwards, by which I mean no school system, really low literacy rate, and no chance to really very quickly come in with a school system and fix that, do not bother with literacy. The reason for this is twofold, the second one being the more interesting one, because that is the one about human batteries. Because, see, we have to ask ourselves, why do we care about literacy? Obviously, listen, if you want to do a more progressive run, you need literate pops so that they become politically active and then actually demand progressive policies. But if you don't really care about this, what is the point of it? Well, fundamentally, there are 2 points. You can research things faster if you have a high literacy rate. You see this right here, our weekly innovation is indeed capped by the literacy rate that you can see right there. Now, this is good and this is all fine. The other reason, though, is qualifications. If you have a higher literacy rate, it is incredibly likely that your population, even the unemployed folks, will actually be capable of having high-tier education things, so higher qualifications. Now, as you can see here, That's not even a concern for us, but the explanation there is going to take up the main part of this video. This means that literacy is good for those two things. We know the first one doesn't really matter anymore because we cannot possibly catch up with the actual literacy rate and then the research rate of the developed countries. And the second one with the, well, qualifications won't really matter either because of human batteries. Let's start though by exploring how we can still research incredibly quickly. Now what this means is that our innovation is actually capped by our literacy, which is chronically very low. We could try to bring up that literacy, but at the same time, if you have infinite population, yeah, your bureaucracy cost will skyrocket. It will basically bankrupt you for no reason whatsoever. The opportunity cost is not worth it. That money could be going into the industry, into SOL, into war, into so many different things. But realistically speaking, this isn't going to do anything for us anyway. We need to catch up because we are helplessly far behind, and the further behind you are, the better is technology spread teching. What this means is we are researching 3 things with this average technology spread that is of course rolled, so it can be higher, it can be lower, and we want to get this as high up as possible. Now you can see that literacy also plays a factor here, but it's a really trivial factor. What we want to do ideally would be getting rid of censorship, but honestly we don't even care about it because what we can actually just do is have spillover technological innovation. What that means is, once we max out here on innovation, the remaining innovation gets utilized in the technology spread. I believe it is 20% of every innovation point that goes over the cap is used in technology spread. Which means if I spam universities, yeah, you guessed it, we're going to generate an insane amount of spread. We won't be able to get ahead, but we will pull up and basically equalize. And that is the goal right here. Let's be really pulling ahead, as India is going to be very difficult, again, until you play highly optimized. So what we're going to do is we're going to research dialectics. Sadly, this hasn't been done yet, which will give us philosophy departments. This indeed will also give us more innovation, which then goes more into tech spread, and Bob's your uncle, all of a sudden everything explodes. Alright, so first things first, let's just build up these construction sectors, and then once that is done, I will obviously take a look, hey, do I need to build anything else here? Do I need to import, for example, wood? And once that is satisfied, don't worry about it too much. We are going to go negative here. I know that especially a lot of new players are very afraid of doing this. Do not be afraid. If you are generating more GDP than you are spending, your income from minting, taxes, and so on will catch up, and you will have a zero out point at some point in somewhere in the debt. For example, at 50% of the credit limit, which then makes it so that you are good to go anyway. Going bankrupt with this method is very, very difficult unless you simply overbuild like crazy and then just stop building. Like, you'll be fine. And apparently Oranje is actually our vassal, which is really weird because they are nowhere near our market. What happened here? Why did you transfer Oranje to India? They are starving down there. They're suffering. They're having a really bad time. Now, I haven't even finished building all of these universities yet, but just to make you understand how powerful this is if you are backwards, well, let's take a look at this. I started researching steel frames with my normal rate, and it is painfully slow. This guy up here was like, you know what? I would like to dish out between 81 and 243 spread every single time. And that is exactly what we're getting. It is massively, massively faster. And much more importantly, actually, it researches 3 technologies at once, which if you are behind will always be the case. Mind you, if you catch up, obviously it can't research anything and it does nothing. But until then, yeah, this is tragically, tragically massive. Seriously, I just want to recapitulate this. We're getting this tech that was just started by the technology spread before we're getting steel frame buildings. Yeah, forget about literacy, okay? Now, if you are a bit more experienced with Victoria 3, you might now say, okay, wait a minute, but you built this ridiculously large complex now of about upcoming 200 university levels in Delhi. Why didn't you build this spread out so that, you know, this bonus here coming for qualifications will be spread out over all of India? The reason for this is that you are correct if the human batteries didn't exist. So, now I would like to tell you about human batteries that make anything related to qualifications, education, access, and so on completely irrelevant. Alright, so now to really understand what we're doing and why we're doing this, I want to go on a bit of a tangent. A while ago, I took a look at VTM and I said to myself, it would be interesting indeed if qualifications mattered much, much more. If you're not aware, qualifications are basically a collection that says, hey, this pop can work as this or that. Rather, in this case, 724,000 workforce pops are in this unemployed laborer pop, and this is where these people can work if they were to have an open job, which means they're all capable to be laborers, and many of them are capable of being clerks. 2 people are able to be capitalists, and then you see, and so on and so forth. This qualification is determined based on whatever the profession actually needs. So, for example, certain professions, like capitalists right here, requires a certain level of wealth, what makes it so that unemployed laborers that are quite literally starving are basically never viable to be capitalists, but they can be a great many other things, like for example machinists and so on. This is important because this is meant to be a natural barricade towards, hey, wait a minute, we had 1 million unemployed people here, but they are all incredibly underqualified, making it so that you can't really build a complex platform that they can work on. Now that is how it is meant to work. But what this actually is the most powerful education and qualification factory that you could ever get. This pop right here is a human battery if you use it right. To showcase what you need to do to use it right, let's build an industry in the state of Madras. So this is where these unemployed pops are. Whenever we build a new job right here, it first tries to hire from the unemployed section. If there was no unemployed section, it would try to hire from the peasants, and if those weren't there either, it would try to poach employees from other buildings. Which means the first pop that will be hired from, if we have a new building that is profitable enough to hire, is the unemployment pop that we just took a look at. So, if we know this to be the case, let's find, an industry that is fairly profitable. I would say the iron mines are very profitable. And then let's pump up those numbers. Let's build this industry up massively. I think the fishing wharves also doing perfectly fine. We're building basically everything up that is profitable and employs a lot of laborers. Keep that in mind. That is very, very important. Okay, and now we have reached a point where we're just 2 weeks away from the very first buildings being built in Madras. This is very, very important because we're going to be observing a massive, massive shift. Again, these are our Tamil, Hindu, starving, supposedly utterly underqualified laborers that are not having a great time. This workforce right here is what it is. Obviously, they are really qualified. Why that is, we're going to see in a second. But more importantly, take a look at their literacy. They have a literacy right now of 22.53. This is important because as we start hiring, you're going to see a massive change here. So you can see this here already, right? As the weeks pass by, fairly slowly, the literacy starts going up. And then sometimes the bug happens where the pop is like, I actually don't exist, but no, the pop is still here. It's just whatever, okay? But every time we have a hiring wave in the freshly built buildings, you will be able to observe this literacy going up. All right, now please observe this pop. This is the very same labor pop that we had seen in Madras earlier. Now this pop is obviously considerably smaller because, well, we took a whole bunch of these people and made them no longer unemployed. That was the whole point after all. What is important to note here is that the literacy went up dramatically. Now, if you play this regularly, if you build up on a massive level, much like we're doing here, if you're focusing on a particular region, or if you spread it out, as long as you are building faster than the unemployed, then the low literacy pops can actually go and, well, grow, you will be looking at a situation where these pops will never lose their qualifications. They can be starving, they can be stupid, they can be incredibly poor and suffering. They will always, always, always build up these massive qualifications. Now, why is this happening? Why does the literacy rate go up as we employ more people from this pop? The reason here can be found in what we're doing. Right now, obviously, you can see I've built up all these iron mines and so on, but I've also built these steel mills. What exactly we're building does not actually matter. Just don't automate. Now, this is already inherently logical because you have a lot of unemployed people that you want to be having employment, which means you don't want automation, you want, well, a lot of manual laborers. What many people do not fully realize is that when they hire these laborers, would you look at that? They hire them with virtually no literacy. Now, technically, they could have a higher education access, but the way the game hires basically works by essentially saying what is the literacy that this particular pop profession actually requires. When we take a look at machinists, I'm pretty sure it's meant to be like 10% maybe. When we look at engineers, on the other hand, I think it's 50%. I could be wrong here. Let me actually take a look at this pop, and then we can see this in a very particular case, right? Workforce, when we take a look at machinists, you can see I don't necessarily think that they have a literacy. Yeah, I don't think they even have a literacy requirement, whereas, for example, right here, obviously, the capitalists, or more, even a better example, I think, are the engineers. The engineers obviously need an adequate level of literacy. I can't quite remember which level that is. Maybe it's 30%, maybe it's 50%, but the point here is actually pretty straightforward. What that building hires the most every single level are laborers. Laborers do not have a requirement for how much literacy they need, which means that when the building actually hires them, it splits the unemployed laborer pop that we saw earlier and takes away, let's say, 5,000 pops with 0 literacy. Which means the pop that just had 20% literacy will now have, depending on, of course, the ratio, let's say 22, maybe 25. And the more levels you build, the more laborers are being hired, the higher is the actual literacy rate of the unemployed laborer pop. Which means that unemployed laborer pop, even if previously incapable of filling higher positions, is all of a sudden capable of being engineers, of being, aristocrats, for example, because they will be in a position where they have up to 100% literacy. The more you hire from this pop, the better will the literacy be. This is why I call this the human battery. We're looking at pops that should be starving, that should not be able to read, but because of the way the game splits the pop whenever it has a hiring wave, this pop keeps going up in literacy. This also means, of course, that as new pops are born and go into this pop, the literacy goes down slightly, but it has a much, much higher base value. You can push this pop up to 100% literacy, and then any pop that basically grows into this one will drag it down to 98, 97, but who cares? That is still ridiculous literacy, which means the more we focus on these individual pops to build them up, the more will they be capable of holding qualifications. I have seen many pops take a look at qualifications, and I love those mods, don't get me wrong here, I tried it myself. But I actually think that there is no solution to not trivialize qualifications, because the way qualifications work is basically busted. If the human battery, the incredibly smart, unemployed, starving laborer pop is capable of completely gathering all the qualifications that you might ever need. Every month, they get thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people gaining qualifications. And every month, those qualifications can be used in new buildings, which ultimately means that you don't need any literacy. This pop gathers literacy by being hired, that pop splitting into labor pops that actually work in buildings, leaving behind only the smartest and brightest to starve. It sounds ridiculous, and that's because it is, but what it means is, I can build the most high-tech industry. It does not matter. My literacy plays no role. I do not need universities to drive up qualifications. The literacy rate that will be rising as we go does that all on its own. So whenever we finish a building level here, whenever we are actually seeing growth in this particular building, you will be seeing that laborer pop becoming more literate, maybe reading more marks, who knows. But it means that these pops will then indeed keep rising up in their literacy, 54.7%. If we ever run out of this unemployed laborer pop, the next people that will go into work are, of course, the peasants. Currently, these peasants have low literacy. Once we tap into them, you guessed it, they will shoot up in literacy just like the laborers are doing right now. Literacy, education, qualifications, none of that plays a role if you just build fast enough. And would you look at that? As you can see, we have now hired plenty of them. There's still a lot of workforce in this laborer, but more importantly, 99.4% literacy, which now in turn means if I left this pop alone, let's assume we stop building anything here, this pop builds up an insane amount of education access, which means a lot of qualifications, which means qualifications will never again be an issue. If we start building here in Madras right now, the literacy would slowly go down, but we're not stopping to build. We're gonna empty out this laborer pop, and then we're going to tap into the peasant market, and you're gonna see the peasants shooting up in literacy just like this pop is shooting up right now. And then I just want to remind you all the while, our innovation spread it's insane, okay? We're gonna catch up, don't worry. And let's have some fun and observe the very same thing right here in Bihar. You can see we have a lot of unemployed folks. All these unemployed folks have very low literacy. Now that we have a new building on the coal level, you will immediately observe, yep, literacy is going up bit by bit by bit. Again, it might take a while because you have these hiring waves, but the way it hires these laborers now working in this new building just fundamentally makes it so that, well, this pop here is going to skyrocket in literacy like you've never seen before. Our literacy rate now is raising faster than if we had instituted higher levels of school, which is, again, earlier I said don't bother with the school if you have a high population country. That's why. And again, just to highlight this, these are now the peasants pops. We used up the unemployed pops, and all of a sudden we're looking at this going up every single week as we hire new people in the same province. The bigger this pop, obviously, the longer is it going to take to bump up those literacy numbers, but as every hiring wave takes a whole chunk of 0% literacy laborers, yeah, the result is just growth, growth, growth in literacy, which then will ultimately net you 100% literacy peasants, which get massive, massive boosts to their actual education access, sorry, not education access, to their qualifications. And Bob's your uncle, you have an economy that does not need to worry about qualifications, even if all your people are farmers. The reason here being, again, human batteries. So in short, literacy and qualifications matter basically not at all. The reason being that if you are already behind, listen, your normal tech progress, you have absolutely no shot at actually catching up unless you utilize technology spread, which you can very easily do by just overstacking your universities. Now, people again might say, okay, maybe build those universities spread out for the education access and for the qualification access. Don't bother, because as soon as you are tapping into the unemployed laborer or into the peasant market, you will basically skyrocket their literacy, which means their qualifications skyrocket, which means, again, it's never going to be a factor. Human batteries are currently one of the most powerful exploits because it means you don't need a school system. It means you don't really need any education. You don't need to focus on any of the qualification nonsense. It's all solved by the dumbest workers going to the factories while the really smart philosophers starve at level 1 SOL. Yeah, listen, I don't know either. I can just tell you that it works and you can build up your economy with that, even if you're incredibly undereducated and massively behind on technology. I will say at the end of the day, after looking into all these qualification mods and such, that most people don't appear to be aware of this human battery effect, but it is real, it is massive, and again, it has a massive gameplay impact if you look at it and actually, well, see what you can do about it. It's weird, but it works in your favor if you are a nation that didn't start on equal terms with the Europeans, because you will be catching up just by virtue of the massive tech spread, and of course you can build whatever the hell you want even without an education system, because people don't need to know things if this is how literacy actually works with unemployed pops. So with that being said, listen folks, I'll see you later. This is it for this India save. India is already on the way to absolute greatness, and I will see you later, alligator.